Welcome to C.S. Joseph Podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph. Today's question: which of the 16 types has more of a growth mindset? Which types have the growth mindset versus those that do not? This is a great question. I find it fascinating, the source of this question. Thank you, Nicholas, for asking this question. It's really good. Very happy to have the opportunity to answer this. And my answer is definitely not going to be what anyone has expected. So most people think that, thinkers or feelers, and it's so interesting. Like when you look at things from a Myers-Briggs type indicator perspective, like from an MBTI point of view, everyone has these different opinions about what constitutes a thinker or a feeler. And some people assume feelers are more gauged to a growth mindset. Others may say that it's thinkers that have the growth mindset. But the thing is, though, is there's a lot of confusion. How are you defining thinker versus feeler? That's something that there really isn't actually often discussed, much less understood, and that's really frustrating. Because one of the things that really inhibits people when it comes to the MBTI is that the MBTI lettering system is extremely it's limited. As for example, INFJs are thinkers. ESFJs are thinkers, or at least in general, FJs. FJ types are actually thinkers. They are not feelers. They are not feelers. They are thinkers. They are TI users, which means they have introverted thinking in their top 4 functions of their function stack. So from an MBTI point of view, they are thinkers, okay? So this whole idea that thinkers have a growth mindset or feelers have a growth mindset, which one has more of a growth mindset? I mean, if you look at it from just the MBTI lettering system alone, you're never going to get your answer. So I would avoid actually staying away from that point of view entirely.
So, that girl walking by, she's like, "Oh my God, are you filming me right now?"
So instead of walking in front of, behind the camera, she's walking even further because she's afraid. Obvious extroverted sensing, inferior, any nemesis. It's so funny. It's so funny how people just think it's all about them. So, anyway, the point is that you can't rely on the MBTI lettering system. But even then, if you're going to look at, 4 sides dynamics, Jungian analytical psychology, and you're going to compare thinkers by themselves, FJs versus TPs, the reality of the situation is that FJs, see it differently compared to TPs. But why is it necessary to say? Because when we're actually going to be discussing growth mindset, obviously extroverted thinkers are very achievement-oriented. They're very achievement-oriented. Extroverted thinking parent and extroverted thinking hero, they start out their life extremely achievement-oriented. And usually when it comes to achievement, there can be growth, right? The problem is that when you achieve something, you can have the tendency to rest on your laurels, and you're not actually potentially going to achieve more because it's like, hey, I got to the level that I got to. I could stop growing right now. We see this all the time. People go get their bachelor's degree and they stop growing. They get their master's degree, they stop growing. They think they've made it. But the reality of the situation is they haven't made it. They haven't made shit. They haven't made shit at all. So, and that's a lie. They're basically lying to themselves. This is one of the traps that extroverted thinkers get into. In the higher TE they are, earlier in life, they're going to be really focused on achievements. The lower TE they are, meaning if they're TE child or TE inferior, at the beginning of their life, they're not going to care about achievements as much. But at the end of their life, they are going to care about achievements much. So if you're thinking about growth mindset from an extroverted thinker perspective, that's what it looks like. The thing is that the growth is entirely limited by the achievements themselves. There is no growing for the sake of growing, right? However, the thinkers of the types, which are the 16 types, have the highest capacity or potential for the growth mindset. And that are TPs and FJs. However, the problem is that there's a huge difference between TPs and FJs. So TPs have this perspective. They're the TI parents and the TI heroes. TPs have this thing like, hey, I just know the truth, I know the facts, and social norms should bend around the facts that I know. Basically, this means that TPs are the creators of social norms, and truth is separate from social norms. And from the TP perspective, TP types, ENTPs, ISTPs, INTPs, ESTPs, these four types, like, they believe that they determine social norms. What the truth that they know and the facts that they know should determine social norms, and which is actually ends up being true, because in the long run, it's the TP types that actually end up creating social norms that everyone else adopts, that all of humanity adopts, and ultimately FJs really adopt. FJs, however, have this perspective where they don't really consider whether or not something is true or false unless it's already socially accepted, which is a huge problem. So primarily, they're not going to think something is true unless it's already socially acceptable, or if it is socially acceptable. And then they'll consider if it's true or false, which is really lame and actually can end up creating an echo chamber. Not to say that the TPs can't have an echo chamber, they can, but FJs are extremely high risk of it because they just don't really know how to handle input, or they'll listen to anyone's input, or they'll listen to no input entirely, and it just creates an echo chamber. So while FJs think that they're creating social norms, they're not. They're actually facilitating social norms that have been created by the TPs. The TPs created the social norms. And then it's the FJs who are actually just adopting those social norms and then enforcing those social norms based on facts derived from pre-existing social norms, right? Whereas TPs are creating those social norms. So based on this logic, we can actually determine a few things, right? TPs being very deterministic in terms of their ability to determine what social norms should be. And all TPs are pragmatic, but all FJs are affiliative, okay? So who has the greater growth mindset? How could an FJ have a greater growth mindset if they're the ones who are adopting the social norms? Like, how does that even work? You know what I mean? Like, what does that actually say about them? How could they have a growth mindset? Well, they don't. They really don't. They are adopting other growth mindsets. They are adopting other social norms. So their growth mindset is based on their ability to adopt and adapt other social norms and then enforce them upon themselves and other people, basically. And that is essentially their growth mindset. But it is not a true growth mindset. The true growth mindset is actually with TP types. Those types are the ones who have the truest growth mindset because they are constantly aware of the true and false on a regular basis as TI heroes and TI parents. And they're the ones who are creating a growth mindset that is adopted by others. They are discovering a growth mindset for themselves and then actually living that growth mindset. Therefore, everyone else is basically, their growth mindsets, their social norms are entirely determined based on TP types living by example, right? That's why, I usually prefer to not tell people how to live their life. Instead, what I like to do is just live my life the way I think I should live my life. And then as a result of that, I am basically a living example. I am a living example of what, of how to others in terms of how I live my life. People understand my lifestyle, people understand what I do, and then in terms of, how I conduct business, how I conduct family, how I conduct my sexual relationships, basically. And they see that's how I live my life. So I am an example to those people. I don't have to tell them. If they see that there's someone like me living my life, living my lifestyle the way that I do, and they see me being successful with it, then naturally they're going to want to live by that example or not live by that example. But regardless, my example is going to impact their nurture. My example is already creating a social norm, and that's it, because it's normal for me, that means it could be normal for other people, even though it's not normal for other people. And TP types are typically seen as types who are abnormal by the rest of the 16 types, just by default. like the INTPs, those are the mother's basement type, or the ENTPs who are super edgy, creepy, roguish people, or the ISTPs who are like this adrenaline rush, moving from one rush to the next, or the ESTPs who are seen as extremely harsh and potentially abusive and no one wants to be around them anyway, But we all live our life the way we want to or how we should. And eventually people out there adopt our way of living based on our example. It's just natural. Even INTPs. INTPs, collectively, especially INTP men, they're pretty beta. All of a sudden it's okay for everyone to play video games in their basement. It's okay for everyone to get black-pilled. It's okay, that kind of a thing. Or do MGTOW, men going their own way. That's the INTP way, right? Or the red pill way, which is kind of closer to the ENTP side, But regardless, you could look at the TP types as kind of like the Sigma males, from like a male perspective. We just live our lives, do our own thing in general. I'm talking in general for TPs. Obviously, not, as life changes, the first will be last will be first. ESTPs, they start out mega alpha early in their life, and they end up being super beta by the end of their life. Okay, that's very subjective and debatable here. I know I'm being subjective with this, but the point is, it ends up becoming this thing where like people just aren't aware. People are just not like aware of these dynamics. So here's the thing, like TPs have this perspective, like I'm going to live my life the way I want to. So they have no choice but to grow. They have no choice but to do it alone anyway. And then a byproduct of them growing and having their own internal TP growth mindset, they live by and then they create an example basically that FJs look at, and FJs are like, okay, no, we're not going to adopt that lifestyle. Or sometimes FJs are like, yeah, I will adopt that lifestyle, and then they'll enforce it upon other people. So what I'm saying is FJ types are actually dependent upon TPs leading the creation of social norms so that they can facilitate those social norms. That's the point. That's entirely the point. So based on that, like it's so funny, because like, FJs, sometimes they like to pump themselves up and whatnot, but they're really just adopting social norms. They're just enforcing, they're just facilitating. They're not the source. They're not the source of the growth mindset. TP types are the source of the growth mindset for the rest of humanity, basically. So anyway, folks, I hammered that one pretty good. So thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.